Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are working again on this Sierra behind me, and we're gonna tackle some wiring at the beginning, and then we're gonna get into this sick looking Huron Speed turbo kit. Ryan came in the other day and he brought his starter, which is on. The brace on the bottom side of the transmission is also on. He crudely painted this bracket, so the power steering, alternator, all that kind of stuff, like the alternators, he's still got a bolt on, but he put some of the accessory drives on. So I'm going to get going on this wiring harness. As I took it apart, I did label a lot of the stuff, and what I'm going to do, I've kind of laid out the best I can, kind of separating. There's a whole bunch of different kind of strands here, and we're going to thin a lot of this out. And once I get it all removed, all the nonsense taken out, I'm going to wrap it in much nicer loom, kind of like this stuff here. Much nicer loom. It's a lot cleaner, and that stuff doesn't get brittle like this stuff. This is all the factory loom, and it's brittle. It's just breaking apart. So we're gonna get rid of all that. And then once I have it all thinned out, I'll go through and I'll show you which sensors we kept. And we then have to splice some of those into the Holley harness. You know, stuff like oil pressure. The Holley screen will have the oil pressure reading on it, as will the dash. So it's going to share the same signal wire. So we got some splicing to do. But right now, I'm just going to start de-looming everything, pulling everything apart, and cutting out everything I don't need. All right, as you can see by the mess on the floor, I cut quite a bit out of it. A lot of this is that crappy loom, but a lot of it's wiring too. So what we have left, this is the bulk right here, which you're not gonna see because this part of the harness will be going underneath the truck because it's mainly the transmission junk. And there's really probably only one wire in all of this that I need, and that's for the speedometer. But when Ryan unplugged all this, he didn't label anything, and I'm not sure what we need and what we don't need. So I'm just gonna run all this wiring. It's gonna get all nicely wrapped. It's gonna get tucked in where you don't see it. It's gonna go under the truck. And whatever I don't need, like when it comes time to figuring out which one I need, the rest of it's just going to get tied up under the truck. You're never going to see it. So all I'm utilizing is, that's my oil pressure sensor. I'm going to be basically splicing this wire into the one on the Holley so that the gauge cluster will read oil pressure. I've got, that is coolant temperature. So there's a sensor that goes right here on the front of the head. There's also the same hole on the back of the head on this side. So we're gonna put 2 sensors in, one there, one here. The Holley gets plugged into the one. We're gonna plug the truck harness into the other one. That way there's no splicing. The alternator, that's gonna get plugged in as normal for the truck. I'm not sure if, because I'm pretty sure the Holley works without it. It'll still read voltage or whatever, even without the wire. But we'll find out. If it needs it, then I just splice them two together and we're good to go. The only thing left on this harness is that's the starter wire. That guy there. Because the ignition, everything on this truck's all gonna work the same. And that wire goes down for the oil level on the side of the oil pan. So there's really not many plugs utilized anymore. I end up taking everything right back to the plugs and I de-pin them. These are actually really easy to get apart. After you pop the back off, you just take a screwdriver and pry it, it'll pop off. These guys, you just push in the end, that white slot. Just stick a screwdriver in there on each side. There's a white slot on each side in there. And these little blue covers will pop off, the red ones here. And then once you have those off, literally you just push the wire from the backside and they come right out. And that's what all these guys on the floor are. If I can pick one up. They just slide out, pretty easy to get out. And there's a bunch of power source wires that come to the fuse panel. And if you just take a 7mm, zip that out, you pull the whole plug out, and then from the front side, you just use a little flat screwdriver like this to hold. There's a little keeper you just push back, and those pins just pull out, and they just look like these guys, just square guys. So that way I don't have to worry about any power wires just cut, left, ready to arc anywhere, and then this will get popped back in. I'm just waiting on loom to arrive so I can get this all wrapped in loom and we'll get it all tucked in place. Because I want to put the harness and everything all on before we put the hot side on, because I've got to get to the starter down here. I've got wires behind the starter. And once we get the turbo kit on, it makes it a little harder to access stuff like that. Like all this has to get all nicely tucked under the front of the motor. And I'm just trying to get all that on. We're not going to totally finish the wiring today. We're just going to get enough on. Like we're going to get this set in place. We'll get the Holley engine harness set in place so that I can get the turbo kit on and we don't have to fight our way around that. So I'm going to get that all dropped in place and then we start putting the hot side on. So Ryan got the tank dropped out of it and we've got everything laid out for the Aeromotive fuel pump. And what he's running is 2 Aeromotive 340s. And it's pretty much a plug and play kit for the most part for a 2000 Silverado. Now, this part is somewhat universal. Like there is some trimming that we will have to do. We have to measure the depth of the tank. But basically this kit's designed for this truck. So this should drop right in after we trim it. But this is the same diameter as the top of the tank there. We did have to buy a new ring because this one is cooked. There's no way we're saving that after we beat the living piss out of it to get it off. We're just gonna huck it. Because we are working on, you know, as far as the wiring goes, Ryan got a new wire run to the back. What's this? 10 gauge. So we have a 10 gauge run back here now to run these 2 pumps. And I mean, if we're gonna wanna start testing the motor and make sure the fuel level, like I say testing the motor, testing the fuel level sensor, and I gotta pull the float and everything off of this and see if I can make it work on this. Find out how to attach it to this plate so that we can get the fuel gauge working properly. So we're gonna get this hammered out. We're gonna get all this installed so that we can start testing wires. we kind of figured out how we were gonna do the float here. And this is right off of the factory pump. It clips right into the side here. So we unclipped it, and it only sits 3 inches off the bottom of the tank. So what I did was I drilled into this aluminum spacer, and we used a self-tapper that we cut the tip off after I drilled it out with the proper size bit. I cut the tip off because it was too long. You only have so much room before you lose material. And it's sitting right above the clamp here, so it can't rock. And it's in there secure, it's tight. So that should work as long as I can get it through that hole. So the wiring diagram that I found says that this is the plug that plugs into the fuel pump. We want to use the orange and the purple wire for the fuel level sending unit. The gray and the black, that's your ground and that's your power for the fuel pump. We just want to use these two, and I'm going to wire them up right now while I have the complete unit outside the tank, and we're going to test it to see if that float works or not. So keep in mind throughout this whole process, I'm an idiot, Ryan's an idiot, we're both idiots trying to figure this thing out. And I kind of wired up the fuel pump. These are the 2 wires needed for the fuel gauge. And I want to test it before I put it in the tank. So I key it on, and I've got the lights on the back of the gauge, but nothing else is lighting up. The fuel gauge is reading half full, even though it's all the way down. I'm getting no battery voltage, even though there's a battery hooked up. And I mean, it's reading all the oil pressure. It doesn't do the sweep like it's supposed to. Down here is not lighting up. Something's wrong. Now, everything I cut out of the harness, as far as I understand, should not have affected the gauge cluster to act like that. So I did find a diagram that listed, maybe there's a ground that we were thinking. Sure enough, the back of the gauge cluster, there's a black wire with a white stripe that's labeled as ground in the harness. So I just cut some of it back. We ran a wire off of that, which is this guy. So now this is tapped into the ground on this guy, on the gauge cluster. And if I touch this to some metal, it comes alive. Now Ryan's gonna sweep the fuel pump right now, the sending unit. So go ahead, and up she goes.
Forever full.
Forever full. We can just leave it like that. And if he goes down with it.
Yeah. Oh, I already went down. Sorry.
It went down, so put it down. Put it down.
Yeah, it's already down.
So it's down. And now it's empty again. So we figured out our problem. We had to run aground after all the crap I cut out just to make it work. And he's going to be living with some lights, I'll tell you that. But like low coolant, whatever. It is what it is. But we got that working. So now I can put this back in the tank, and I can confidently say that that's going to work. Okay, fuel pump's all mounted in the tank. I just got some tape over the holes so no crap falls in and we don't get a whole whack of fumes in the garage over the next little while. But she's in. So all the wiring is pretty much done inside the cab, minus the speedometer. The speedometer we're gonna have to hold off for now on, because all the research I've done basically says that the Terminator X Max does have, you can select an output, one of the 4 outputs, to run a speedometer through your factory gauge cluster. But with the GM gauge clusters, it requires a certain kind of signal. And the Terminator Max apparently doesn't give out the proper signal to make that tach work. Not tach, speedometer work. So there is a way to do it. We will have to do some more research on it. We're not going to get to it right now. Ryan said he can kind of live without the speedometer for now. So we're just going to keep pushing forward with the other stuff. But he's got the handheld unit mounted right here. And as far as we know, everything else should work. He's got the dash put back together. The computer's mounted right back here. I actually followed the instructions on how to wire everything, and it all worked out really well. In order to get the selector to work for the shifter, what I ended up doing, I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but it did, was this is the controller from the 4L80 that bolts on the side. Let me hold on here. Right up there. This is the one that came with the truck from the 4L60. It bolted right in place so that we could plug everything right back in. Shifter, all this linkage, everything bolts right back up, same spot. So this is the one on 4L80 that we won't be using, but by using that from the 4L60, the selector, everything works. Your neutral safety switch, reverse lights, all that kind of stuff will work as long as you're using that. So while I was editing this video, I noticed that I was missing a very important clip. And that clip basically explains how I wired everything in the gauge cluster. So the 4 other gauges, like for the tach, fuel gauge I just showed you. Everything's dusty now because we've been working in here. Temperature, oil pressure, battery. Battery's pretty straightforward. You hook up to the alternator, you're gonna get your battery. The temperature sensor, so you can put a second temperature sensor on the back on the passenger side, and we had to extend the wires, but that's the factory harness plug in there. Oil pressure. So this is the plug for the Holley. See, it says oil. The gray wire coming out of that plug, that is your signal wire. So that's, you want to tap into the gray wire on the Gen 3 LS's. The oil pressure sensor only has one wire. So you're going to bring that one wire and splice, that's a signal wire. You're going to splice into the gray signal wire. Pretty easy. Then for your tach, I'm going to show you, you can't see it on that anymore because we've already got the starter, the hot side, everything already on. But I'm going to show you on the old motor. Right there's your crank sensor. This is a 24X. There's a 58X as well. And I'm actually pretty sure they're the same wiring orientation on both of them. So whether you have a Gen 3 or Gen 4, it's the same. I want to say it's the top wire. You want to get the signal wire out of here. I had to look up a wiring diagram. It was pretty simple. I wish I could remember the colors. I want to say the factory harness, it's a blue and white wire, is your signal wire. And you want to splice it into the Holley wire that plugs into the same spot. So you basically, like, you can line the 2 plugs up, and the blue and white that's on your factory harness, whatever it corresponds with on the Holley, which it could be like a purple wire or something, if I'm trying to remember. You just can't see. I'd have to tear everything apart now. But you just splice into that, and that'll give you your tach signal. You only want to take the signal wire. Don't hook up to the 12 volts or nothing like that, or bad things are going to happen. So just the signal wire. It's already going to have power from the Holley and the ground from the Holley, and everything should work, hopefully. Now, we won't be able to fully test it until the next video. So if you're seeing this video and you're going to run with it, if it doesn't work, don't complain to me, because you have to watch the next video to know if 100% it works. We are Not professionals. We are figuring this out as we go, and it should work. I don't see why it won't, but to know for sure if it works, you have to watch the next video, but this is how I've wired it so far. Hopefully that helps. We got most of the wire taken care of up here, up front. Let me just get this out of the way. Basically, these are all the dedicated wires for the Holley. They basically have wires that you're supposed to run right to the battery. This guy right here is for the fuel pump. We're gonna run a single relay that's gonna power both pumps with a fuse. And the green wire that comes out of the Holley, we're just using as a trigger wire to flip that on. So just, you know, put it right to the box. The harness is all laid out and mostly plugged in. We're waiting on a few things. We ran into an issue with this steel fabricated intake on a truck setup, puts the fuel rail really close to the alternator. So we can't get a fitting on there. And we want to put a fitting in there that's got the provisions to put the fuel pressure sensor, because the cord is right here for it, the plug. And we obviously don't have the room. So Ryan's been sourcing out a bracket that moves the alternator over here. ICT Billet and a few other companies make a bracket, and it basically gets rid of this whole aluminum cast piece and holds the fuel or the power steering and the alternator and just moves this guy out here so that we have all the room to make our turn with our fuel line. And then we can get all the injectors, everything all set in place, plug everything in. This is for the wideband. But other than that, the wiring is pretty much good to go. We did check it, engine turns over. So I think we're ready now to finally get the turbo kit bolted on. Now, we did go through, there's no instructions that come with this kit. All the instructions are online. And I actually did go through the directions on how to install this thing. And it seems pretty straightforward, just as I would have done it anyway. We are going to choose to not heat wrap anything, except for, I believe there's a blanket that comes to wrap around the starter to protect the starter. Ryan did buy the boots that slide over the spark plug wires to kind of protect them. But for everything, and then there's obviously the boot that goes around the turbo itself. But I mean, anything that we see of an issue, like there is this guy.
That I believe was for the AC, but we don't have AC.
So we might use this around something else if we find a wires close to anything hot. You know, even like the wideband or any kind of sensor wire. But if we find it is an issue with heat, we do have the wrap and it's easy enough to pull everything off. Like if it, you know, the crossover pipe is too close to something, we can heat wrap it. The down pipe, we can heat wrap if need be, because it did come with a roll. But that stuff sucks to play with. And if you've ever worked on a vehicle that has heat wrap already around the pipe, you don't want to touch it with your skin or else it's extremely irritating. So if we can build this truck and work on it without heat wrap, that would be a bonus. So we're gonna try that. All right, let's get bolting this together. Well, probably about a good hour of wrestling. The turbo kit's on. Yee. It fit decent. We did have, Ryan was wrestling with this side a bit to find out that it was just the gasket. We had to bend the end of the gasket up, this little metal tab, because it was hitting that sensor and wasn't lining up properly to get the bolts in. So that was an easy fix. This side, I don't know if just the holes on the flange weren't drilled exactly correct, but I had to fight. One hole, I started to actually cross thread this guy right here because the bolt just wouldn't line up exactly right. I'd get a couple threads in and it would start to get really stiff. So I took it all out and I actually had to run a tap through there just to clean the threads up. In the end, I got it all in, but it went in kind of tight on some of them. So whether the holes maybe should have been clearanced a little bit better, not sure. And then down there, I had to clearance the corner, right about there, of the transmission. There's a little ear sticking off the transmission. I just had to clearance it a bit with a flap disc because it was touching the exhaust. But all in all, not too bad. Like, you know, like I said, probably about a good, I would say, hour we spent. But it's on. It would have taken a lot longer to make one from scratch. So we got a good clearance on everything. We are now going to try and get the downpipe and blow off valve and everything all on. This turbo is actually a little bit bigger than what this kit calls for. This is, I believe, a 4-inch. It's a 4-inch exit on the exhaust. So Ryan had to buy an adapter to go from 4-inch down to 3-inch. But now that spaces everything out further back, right? Because now we're adding another probably about 1.5 inches or so with the V-bands. And this recirc for the blow-off valve is supposed to go right back into the downpipe, which is right here. So now the spacing is going to be incorrect. But now Ryan was already talking about not using the recirc function and just exiting to atmosphere. So we're going to get this all bolted up. We'll see just how far off everything is. And then what we'll probably end up doing is we might end up lopping this off, welding a plate over that hole, and just exiting his, we'll just build a down tube for it. But let's see how things line up first. So I'm not sure if I showed this, but the transmission cross member came in and it actually fits really good. The only thing we had to do was spin the mount around backwards, and everything fit great. And that's just an Amazon buy. I think he paid like 160 bucks Canadian for it, and she bolted right in place. So very, very easy swap there. Well, we've hit yet another roadblock, which happens with projects like this. You can try and plan ahead and buy everything you think you need. There's always gonna be something you overlooked or that doesn't just work out the way you want it to. So the downpipe, because of the spacer, sets everything further back. So now the downpipe's hitting the floor. We have some cutting to do. I'm gonna have to cut it off right about here. And then I'm gonna cut off the V-band off of here to shorten this up, basically to make up the difference of this 3-inch to 4-inch reduction, to make it short enough where it fits right. And I tried mocking up the wastegate, but unfortunately Ryan ordered the wrong wastegate. He ordered a 2-inch, which is a 50 mil. What we need is 1.75 inch, which is a 44 mil. And that's what the kit called for, was a 44, and he overlooked that and he bought a 2-inch. So that's not gonna fly either. I'm not gonna get into trying to cut off these flanges and try to weld a bigger flange on the small diameter pipe. We're not gonna do that. We're just gonna order the right one. And then little things like the oil feed. It didn't come with the 1/8 NPT fitting to a -4 for the top of that, so we gotta get little fittings like that. I did get the drain in. So we got little setbacks here. So that's going to be a good place to stop right now for tonight with this. And while we're waiting for parts to come in, tomorrow I'm going to start attacking the rear end. Because all the suspension's coming out, and we got new 4-link brackets here, 4-link bars over here. I know it's dirty looking, but all that came from a guy we know that bought this kit years ago for his truck. He never ended up using it. It's just sat in his garage, and Ryan ended up buying it off of him, and now we're going to utilize it. So while we're waiting for parts, we're going to get going on that stuff. But for today, I think we did all right. Turbo's sitting in place, looking stellar. But that'll be it for this video. We'll see you guys next time.